So I wonder if this morning you can think of a time in your life where God surprised you. You can think of a time when your life changed course in a way that you didn't anticipate, or a time when you heard something in Scripture, or you heard something in your own prayers, or you discussed something here in your faith community that changed your mind about something that you were really certain about previously. I wonder if you can think of a time when God surprised you and did something that you didn't expect. For me, one of the biggest surprises that God has done in my own life, frankly, is bringing me to Omaha. And I'm sure I'm not the only person that's ever been surprised that they ended up in Omaha. And for me, it's not totally crazy. I grew up in Nebraska. I grew up in the western part of the state in North Platte. I mean, other than us always wondering why anyone would want to live in Omaha, we had nothing in particular against Omaha. I went to Hastings College right after I graduated from high school, and right after I graduated from Hastings College, I left almost immediately, within weeks, to attend graduate school in Connecticut. And I can still remember the day that I drove out of Nebraska. I can still remember the very moment when I drove across the state line. And I remember thinking to myself, it's strange to think that I will never live in Nebraska again. So I was as surprised as anyone when God called me to Omaha about 6 years ago. And it is a great example of the old saying that if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. But if you look at the scriptures, and if you look at church history, and if you think about your own life, God's always doing that. Over and over and over again, God is always doing the thing that is surprising, and that's unexpected, and that's new. And I think that's a lot of what's happening in our reading this morning from the book of Acts. So in that story that we heard, Paul and Silas are hanging out in a Roman colony called Philippi. And the thing about Roman colonies is that they were like ultra-Roman. The way Romans set up colonies is that they would go in, and all the people who were already living there, they would kick them all out, and they would set up a great little town, and then they would give all these great housing to people that the Roman Empire thought were important and that they were grateful to. So retired military generals and diplomats and politicians and basically anyone that the Romans thought was important, they would allow to live in these colonies, which means Philippi was one of the most committed Roman places outside of Rome. They were really committed to Roman traditions and to Roman ways of life. So Paul and Silas show up, and not only are they proclaiming this weird foreign god that's not Roman, but then they encounter this slave girl who has a spirit of divination, and she's able to presumably, tell people their futures and spot things about people, which makes her owners a lot of money. And she's following Paul and Silas around, and she's basically affirming, hey, there's something to this God that Paul and Silas are talking about. And for some strange reason that I actually can't figure out, that annoys Paul, that she's following them around, kind of affirming everything that they're saying. So Paul casts the spirit out of this girl. And of course, her owners and everybody else in the town kind of freak out about this. They get really mad about it. And I think it's easy for us to look at this story and to basically disassociate ourselves from all those people who got really mad, right? We can think, well, we don't worship all the Roman gods like Apollos and all that stuff. We don't have an economy that continues to be based on slavery and that sees people as essentially commodities. So it's easy for us to say, we're not like them at all. But I wonder if that's true. I mean, think for a minute. All of the people in the colony of Philippi were really, really committed to a particular way of living, to particular ways of doing things, and to particular beliefs. And what scandalized them was when this new God came in and started meddling with their economic system and their religious system and with their Roman ways of life. how many of us are completely committed to our own certainties about God, about the way other people should behave, about what everybody should think, about the way things should be done, our expectations of how the world is supposed to look? I mean, how many of us have things that we're so certain that we and we alone are right about, that they almost become like gods that we worship, or spirits that enslave us? You know, more and more, I've come to the conclusion in my life that the opposite of faith is not actually doubt. More and more, I've come to the conclusion that the opposite of faith is certainty. Because when we are inflexibly committed to our way or the highway, when we believe that we and we alone are right, what happens is that we close ourselves off, and there's no room for the God who's always doing new and surprising and unexpected things. So I think one of the things that reading from Acts this morning invites us to do is to think about what are the things in our lives that we're so certain we're right about that we begin to close off God, who's always trying to do something new. And it seems to me that human tendency that all of us have to be inflexibly certain about this, that, or the other thing about God or about other people or whatever it is the cause of so much division in our own hearts, in our homes, in our nation, and divisions in our whole world. Today is the last Sunday of Easter. And Easter is a season where for 50 full days we celebrate God's biggest surprise. The most unexpected, unlikely, crazy thing that God did when he raised Jesus from the dead. I mean, any reasonable person would look at the world and very logically conclude that things that are dead tend to stay dead. But with Jesus experienced this death that tends to stick when it happens. And God raised Jesus up to this new and glorified and everlasting life. And it's a promise that God intends to do the same thing with all of us and with the whole world. That is something that pierces all of our certainties about how the world is supposed to work. So during these days of Easter, and as Easter people in the world, really our faith is about being open to the new things that God is always doing. Our faith is about looking for the unexpected ways that God is bringing new life, that God is showing love between people, that God is bringing joy out of the despair that's in the world. So in these last days of Easter, what are the certainties in your own life and in your own heart that have calcified and that box the God who's always trying to do a new thing out of your own life? What are the things that keep you from experiencing the fullness of God's Easter power? If we allow ourselves in these last days of Easter to let God kind of break us open, and we just might find that we see new joy growing out of the deepest sorrow. We might see God's light piercing our deepest darkness. We might see hope rising out of the world's despair. And we just might see God's new and glorious and endless life blooming again